How can we know we have hope? Hope is more than a feeling. It's a conviction. It's a conviction of what happened to Jesus. It's a conviction of what's going to happen for us in the future. So resurrection is something that we as believers, we have to keep coming back to this. And N.T. Wright, in his book, Surprised by Hope, he has done incredible work on the resurrection and the historic credibility of the resurrection, the plausibility of the resurrection. He says there's 4 strange features in the resurrection that should make us pause and say, wow, this isn't just a cool made-up story. This is like something that changed history. And out of this Jewish religion came Christianity. First of all, in the Gospels, and he's looking particularly at the gospel accounts of the resurrection, so Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There are no Old Testament supports in the gospel accounts for the resurrection. Jesus predicts his own resurrection. He does. He says, I'm going to die, and 3 days later I'll be raised. After he's raised, nowhere do any of the gospel writers attach an Old Testament verse to proof text it. They proof text a lot of stuff in Jesus' life. That he would be born of a virgin, that he would set captives free, that he would go off to Egypt. I mean, there are lots of fulfilled prophecies in the life of Jesus that you see in Matthew, you see it show up a little bit in Mark and Luke and John. Never do you see the resurrection tied to an Old Testament proof text. Why is that significant? Because it broke from the Jewish expectation. The Jews expected a one-time resurrection at the end of all time. And Jesus was a one-person resurrection in the midst of time. And they had no verse to understand this. This was something new. Now, Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 through 3 hints at it, but the Jews would have read that and think, that's for the future. So the fact that there's no Old Testament proof text says this is something new and different. The Jews couldn't have just made that up. They couldn't have. Another thing that's shocking, who were the first witnesses? Read all the gospel accounts. Women. There's actually something called the Gospel of Thomas, which was written much later than Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It focuses just on the sayings of Jesus, and it has some things that line up with what we have in our Gospels, and then a lot of things that are a little weird, like this one. It is better for a woman to be a man. That's what the Gospel of Thomas says. Because no one would want to be a woman back in that day. The worst thing would be to be a woman back in this day. And so who is going to take a group of women to be the very first witnesses to the resurrection? I'd rather take a drunk. I would rather take someone who constantly lies. I would rather take someone who doesn't speak English than a woman. That's the worst witness you could have. I mean, maybe this is overstating it a little bit, but who are the first witnesses? Women. And the gospel records don't try to hide that. They actually celebrate that. Which, ladies, I think that's like a great truth for you all to say, like, man, Jesus dignifies you, and the gospel writers say, your word matters. And when we do this God Talk workshop, one of the beautiful things that you'll see about testimony throughout history, if you come on Wednesday or Saturday, is that testimony has been a powerful way throughout history to give women a voice, where they haven't always had a voice, or minorities a voice, where they haven't always had a voice. And you see this in the Gospels. You have this curious description of the risen Jesus. N.T. Wright looks at this and says, like, this is kind of weird. He's not like floating on clouds. That's kind of what you'd expect. He's like a human who has scars and holes in his hands, who has bones, who eats fish. But he also just appears and disappears. Oh, that's kind of strange. And so that's a curious feature of the resurrection. Finally, silence about the future hope and glory. And what N.T. Wright says here is when you read the Apostle Paul talk about the resurrection, like in chapter 15 of 1 Corinthians, it's always pointing us forward and saying, hey, this is coming for us too. You get to be raised, and you get to be raised, and you get to be raised. This isn't the end. Always pointing in that direction. Read the Gospels. Never says that. In the Gospels, Jesus appears and he goes, you got some work to do. You got some work to do. And it's more about the meantime. And so these are curious features about the resurrection that say, wow, this is like solid hope that's given to us. It breaks expectations. We should pay attention to this. And then there are three evidences that Paul outlines, the first two in 1 Corinthians 15. One, there's an empty tomb. Jesus was buried, and then there was no body in the tomb. And people have looked, and they didn't find it. And they had guards posted out there, and they couldn't reproduce the body. Empty tomb. You have witnesses. Jesus appeared to these women, and then Jesus appeared to Peter and James and John, and last of all, Paul. 500 people, 1 Corinthians 15 says. You have witnesses who are living when Paul's writing this. And they could corroborate that, or they could deny it. And those who were put on trial for it unto death said, nope, he was risen, I believe it, I'll take the bullet for it. That's pretty good evidence too. And then the final evidence is church history. There were messianic movements before Jesus, there were messianic movements after Jesus, people who claimed to be the Christ. And Rome didn't like that, and neither did the Jews. And you know what they did to those people? And you know what happened to their movements? Nothing. Why did Christianity persist? Why did these people take a bullet for it? Christianity was something more than just a Jewish renewal movement. It was different. It included Gentiles. That was like unheard of. That's why Apostle Paul was persecuted all the time. There's no reason the church should exist if it was just a messianic movement. It was something more. It was something more. It was based on the risen Jesus Christ. If it's not true, I'll walk out the door and you should follow me. And then go your own way, because I'm going nowhere.